Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Well, whatever we might be doing, whatever else we might be doing, agricultural, educational, social, intellectual, academic, political, medical, mental, industrial, whatever it is we're doing. Don't neglect the chanting. Don't neglect the chanting. There's only a certain amount of time in a day, and it's very easy for the time to get gobbled up. Like devotee recently said, one thing leads to another, and before you know it, the sun's going down. And you didn't chant. Well, you only chanted a little bit. Hey, good morning, Liz. Hare Krishna. I'm just reflecting on how no matter what it is anybody's doing, whatever it is they're doing, not to neglect the chanting. And how easy it is because there's only a certain amount of time in a day for the day to slip by. And you just fell victim to one thing leads to another, but it didn't lead to chanting. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I was just spending some time yesterday with a devotee who has a very good job. They don't like it because they don't want to be working all the time, but Hare Krishna. It's a good job. And so they're making sufficient income, and they have what they need in life. But they're unhappy. They just want to, they want to serve the deities, basically. They have a lot of past service in the temple as a pujari, serving the deities, but now they find themselves out in the world working all day. They don't like it. So their mind is racing. How can I get out of this situation? I got myself in this situation. How can I get out of it? I just want to serve the deities. I want to dress them and offer puja. I want to serve in the temple. I want to cook for them like this. So their mind's racing. How can I do that? How can I? But they can't. They're stuck. They have a big mortgage. And they can, but they're not getting sufficient insight to use their intelligence, how to arrange their life so they can do this service for Krishna. It's just, they're stuck. They want to, but they want this other thing also. That's why they're doing it. Even though they don't like it. So I have a sneaky suspicion that they're neglecting the chanting. I think they're neglecting. But Krishna, if he favors a devotee, he'll put them in a situation that's so difficult that they can't figure their way out of, and become so desperate and frustrated that they actually take shelter of chanting. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. In a helpless situation, they begin to experience another kind of consciousness that's Krishna consciousness. It no longer just becomes something that you're doing for Krishna, and Krishna's over there somewhere. And you'll get to that eventually. But meanwhile, you're very busy doing this other thing. And if you're chanting, it's snick, snick, ram, 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 snick, ram, 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 snick, snick. I did my 16. Now I can go do what I really want to do. Actually, Prabhupada said like that. He said, yeah, now I chanted my 16 rounds. Now I can do whatever I want to do. Whatever I want to do, I can do. Yeah, here's the 16. Snick, snick, rum, 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 snick. Hurry, rum, rum, rum. Snick, snick, snick. Sometimes, when I'm in the temple and there's devotees and they're chanting, there's like a hissing sound. Years ago, I had the opportunity to serve Prabhupada's personal Radha Krishna deities. They're small. Those little deities that we hear about when we're reading his Prabhupada Lila that his father gave him, that before he came to India, when he was a child, when he was a young man in college, he had those little Radha Krishna deities. Well, they're installed in the temple in Brooklyn. And I was staying in Brooklyn Temple for a little while. This is like in the early 80s. And I had the opportunity to serve those little deities on the altar. It was the afternoon offering, which is sweets and fruits. You put them to rest, they have a little bed, and then you wake them up, and they get fruits and sweets. And so that was my service. And there was a devotee in the temple. I was behind the curtain doing the pujari type stuff for the deity. And there was a devotee in the temple room. And I could hear her chanting. Snick, 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 snick. And I couldn't stand it anymore. It sounded like there was a snake in the temple room. So I parted the curtains a little bit, stuck my head out and said, "Stop it! Chant Hare Krishna! Hear yourself, chant nicely!" And then went back into the temple, back behind, serving the deities. It's kind of a weird thing to do. I mean, who am I to do that? But I did it. And, I didn't see that devotee like for years and years and years, like 30 years. And I saw them recently, and they remembered me. I didn't really remember them until they reminded me of that little incident. And she said that scared her out of her wits, because she saw that was Krishna directly, the deity directly on the altar, chastising her. And she says she's very careful to chant. She has been all these years, and she even does like 20 rounds. We're really good friends now, and she's actually helping me to be Krishna conscious. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. But don't neglect the chanting, because I could see with this devotee, very nice devotee, they had a lot of temple service at one time. Now they find themselves out in the world, struggling, working, and they're thinking how to get out of the situation and get back to where they were. No. That's not the solution. The solution is, wherever you are, take shelter of the chanting. And there's so much opportunity for her to preach. She has a service where she comes into contact with the public all day long. And if her attitude was a little different, that I don't want to do this work. I don't like it. I want to be in the temple with the deity. I don't like this, but I have to do it. If her attitude, she was chanting, the mantra is non-different from the deity. Krishna is incarnated as his form on the altar, made out of wood or marble or brass, or sometimes a painting is a deity, like that. So those are kind of like gross elements. But Krishna is incarnated in sound. It's the most subtle of the gross elements. You can't see it or smell it or taste it or touch it, but you can hear it. So it's a very fine element. Of all the gross elements, the ones you can touch and taste and smell and see with your senses, the deity incarnated in sound is perceived by hearing. So the deity in the grosser elements is there to help us. But ultimately, the worship in this age is the mantra. Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I'm going to see them again soon. Maybe I can kind of share some of this with them a little bit, give them something to think about while they're on the merry-go-round of how to get back to where I was, and I don't like where I am, and I'm not chanting, or if I'm chanting it's 1 or 2 rounds and it's torture. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I love that post that Jocelyn just did. Her posts are like, they're like, wow. But this one particularly, it shows Krishna, and he's walking. You see his back. You're behind Krishna, and he's walking. He has his flute, and there's little footprints in the sand. And the little caption is, "Follow me, chant Hare Krishna." I love that. It's great. In order to really bring that home, that message, Krishna appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But he could follow me, chant Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Then, for whatever else you have to deal with, you'll get some clear insight. And you'll also see that it's not you alone dealing with these things. That Krishna's behind the scenes, and he's making some interesting arrangements. You just make the effort, and Krishna makes the arrangements. I remember hearing something about that, like on the spiritual platform, in the spiritual world, nothing to do with the material world. If you want to make a puri for Krishna, Krishna supplies the flour, the ghee, the heat source. He supplies everything. You want to make the puri. And poof, there's a puri for Krishna. Krishna makes the arrangements. You really start to see miracles. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna. I mean, it's Prabhupada said if we actually knew who the deity was, like in the temple, the deity, or in the sound, the deity in the sound, if we actually understood who that really was, what that really was. He said, we'd collapse. We'd be like, I don't think he used the words, but something like, blown away. Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Like I was thinking about that, there's a few Harinam parties that go out here. Different groups have different mindsets, and groups that are of the same mood, they'll go out on a Monday night, and then there's another group that has a little different mood, they go out on a Friday, and then there's two more groups that go out on Saturday in the afternoon, and they have different moods. But they're all going out in public chanting Hare Krishna. So we tend to think of that as the Sankirtan. That's the Sankirtan. The whole movement is the Sankirtan. The whole movement, with everyone in it, is the Sankirtan. I was thinking about that and just, can I say, blown away. Prabhupada said, take part in this, even if you have to be a stowaway in the luggage department, the cargo. Get on board, even if you have to be a stowaway in the cargo department. Even if you can't travel first class, you don't have a seat in the passenger, stowaway in the baggage department. Get on board. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Sinful or pure? Initiated or uninitiated? Intelligent or dull? Rich or poor? Take shelter of the holy name. Go back home. Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Yeah, so really relishing hearing about Prabhupada's adventures. So this is the first volume. There's 6 volumes. And then I think there's a sequel too or something. Anyway, this is India, the wartime. And Prabhupada was trying to launch his Back to Godhead magazine. He was running into government restrictions on use of paper. There was a paper shortage in the war. But he was very persistent. And by preaching to the ministers and the government in charge of this, he convinced them that his publication was not out of place at this time, that actually it was very much needed to help people fix their mind on the actual goal of life and give them relief from the sufferings that were going on. And he was a little heavy with them. Like part of the letter he says, he remarked that the editorial board of Back to Godhead felt, editorial board, yeah, editorial board, who's the editorial board? Yeah, he's the editor. The editorial board felt there was not so much a scarcity of paper as a scarcity of education. The letter was successful. Now, with veiled sarcasm, he headlined his second issue, "Thanks to the government of India." He had to fight like anything to get it printed. He informed his readers, many of whom had been disappointed to learn that the government had curtailed his printing, that he would be able to continue his magazine every month. Abhay printed his letter to the government paper officer and also reply granting him permission. So he showed how he managed to get the paper. He put it right in the magazine. His articles were shorter, this time displaying the flair of a news columnist. As with philosophical criticism, verve, and a touch of ironic humor, he commented on world leaders and the crises. Gandhi Gin Talks, Mr. Churchill's Humane World, Mr. Bernard Shaw's Wishful Desire, and Spontaneous Love of Godhead comprised the issue. Yes, it sounds like sometimes newspapers do that, journalists, they poke jabs. Gandhi Jinnah Talks. We are sorry to learn that Gandhi Jinnah talks about unity of the Indian people have failed for the present. Abhay was not very optimistic about the results of such occasional talks between several heads of government. Even if they made a successful solution, it would break up and take the shape of another problem. They were looking for unity between Muslims and Hindus. But in Europe, the fighting party were Christians, and in Asia, they were mostly Buddhists. But still, they were fighting. So fighting will go on between Hindu and Mohammedan, Hindus and Hindus, Mohammedans and Mohammedans, Christians and Christians, Buddhists and Buddhists, till the day of annihilation. As long as there was the contaminated self-interest of sense gratification, there would be fighting between brother and brother, father and son, nation and nation. Now we see that kind of discord going on with this virus difficulty. Friends don't agree on how to deal with it. Family members. Some members of a family agree, some don't. So it's like what was going on in the war. They were fighting with each other over issues, and actually fighting. It was life and death in the war, and it's also a kind of life and death with the virus thing. But the fighting goes on. They can't agree. They're divided. So Prabhupada says the solution to this kind of fighting, either a war or an epidemic, says real unity would stand only on a plane of transcendental service to the Supreme. Mahatma Gandhi, Abhay wrote, is far above ordinary human being, and we have all respect for him. But Abhay advised Gandhi to give up his activities on the material plane and rise to the transcendental plane of the spirit. Then there could be talks about the unity of all people. Abhay cited Bhagavad Gita's definition of a Mahatma, one who concentrates his attention on the service of the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. He requested Mahatma Gandhi to adhere to the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and preach its message of surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. In this way, Mahatma Gandhi, through his influential position in the world, could bring about universal relief simply by preaching the message of Bhagavad Gita, which is something similar to what Prabhupada did with the Beatle member, George Harrison. George Harrison took up Krishna consciousness. He was chanting japa, and he was hearing from Prabhupada, he was reading Gita, and he wanted to quit his music thing, shave his head, and move into a temple. he asked Prabhupada if he could do that. And Prabhupada said no. He said, it's about service. And you're a very influential, popular figure. People will appreciate what you have to say. They're attracted to your music. I don't know if there's exact words, but this was the idea. And so he encouraged George Harrison to continue with his musical talents, remain a popular figure, and through that be able to direct people towards Krishna. And so there's that very famous song, I really want to know you, I really want to see you, Lord, but it takes so long, and it's Hare Krishna, and other things that he did, public appearances, and speaking also, and it became well known that he was a disciple of Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and was supporting the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Was he instrumental in getting the Bhaktivedanta Manor? I'm not sure, the big temple in London, but we know he donated sufficiently for the printing of the first volume of Krishna book. We know that. And at the time it was a sizable amount. In the 70s, $18,000 was a lot of money. You're looking at like $50,000 today at least, because of inflation. So in that way, he was serving Prabhupada, keeping his popularity. So Prabhupada's advising Gandhi also, but to preach the message purely, and not simply some political issues. Actually preach the message of Gita, surrender to Krishna, and use his influential position to do it. So that was in the magazine. And then another article, this is like little overviews of the articles. Mr. Churchill's Humane World. So Prabhupada writes, we are pleased to find that leaders of politics such as Mr. Churchill have nowadays begun to think of a humane world and trying to get rid of the terrible national frenzy of hate. The frenzy of hatred is another side of the frenzy of love. The frenzy of love of Hitler's own countrymen has produced the concomitant frenzy of hatred for others. So it's misplaced, so-called love. It's misplaced. It's material identification. I love my people, but I hate your people. It's just the other side. The frenzy of love of Hitler's own countrymen has produced the concomitant frenzy of hatred for others. And the present war is the result of such dual side of a frenzy called love and hatred. So when we wish to get rid of the frenzy of hate, we must be prepared to get rid of the frenzy of so-called love. This position of equilibrium, free from love and hatred, is attained only when men are sufficiently educated. So the different kinds of an attachment. Hatred is an attachment. And love, so-called love, is an attachment. So equilibrium. Krishna, consciousness. Until men were educated to see the soul within the body, the dual frenzy of love and hatred would continue, and a humane world would not be possible. This introspection, Abhay concluded, is easily attained by the service of Godhead. So, Mr. Churchill's humane world implies we must go back to Godhead. Krishna. Prabhupada is so good at finding the little drop and turning it toward Krishna. So Mr. Churchill wants a humane world. Well, that implies go back to Godhead. He's just saying that it's not possible materially. And I'm remembering a situation where early on the devotees were outside a lecture hall where a big Mayavadi was lecturing. I don't know which one it was. Somebody came from India, Mayavad teachings. And there was a long line of people waiting to get in. And the devotees were there. They used to like to go to places where there were long lines of people because they can't go anywhere. They're captivated, right? And try to approach them. They can't walk away. They're in line. Captive audience. And try to get them to take a book. So there was someone there passing out flyers to other people. It was a busy city street, to invite them to the Mayavadi lecture. So the devotees were saying, oh, thank you, I'll take one of those. And then, oh, I'll take some more of those. Oh, I'll help you pass those out. And they were getting all the flyers so that people wouldn't go into a Mayavadi lecture. And they came back to the temple. It must have been New York, I'm thinking. And they showed Prabhupada a big stack of flyers that they confiscated from. And Prabhupada saw it was a Mayavadi lecture. And he turned them over. The other side was blank. And he had the devotees use them as placemats for taking prasadam. Krishna. So, Mr. Churchill's humane world implies we must go back to Godhead. And then, in dealing with Bernard Shaw, Mr. Bernard Shaw's wishful desire. Mr. Bernard Shaw has congratulated Mahatma Gandhi on the occasion of the latter's 76th birthday in the following words. I can only wish that this were Mr. Gandhi's 35th birthday instead of his 76th. We heartily join with Mr. Shaw in his attempt to subtract 41 years from the present age of Mahatma Gandhi. But death does not respect our wishful desire. Neither Mr. Shaw nor Mahatma Gandhi nor any other great personality had ever been able to solve the problem of death. So then Prabhupada's article continues, the leaders of nations have opened many factories for manufacturing weapons for the art of killing, but none has opened a factory to manufacture weapons for protecting man from the cruel hands of death, although our wishful desire is always not to die. So then the biographer continues here. Men were preoccupied with the problem of how to get bread. Although this problem is actually solved by nature, man should try to solve the problem of death. Bhagavad Gita tells that the problem of death can be solved. Although death is everywhere in the material world, one who attains to me, says Krishna, never has to take his birth again in the material world. There is a spiritual world, non-destructible, and one who goes there does not come back to the region of death. Why should the leaders of nations cling to the planet of their birth where death is inevitable? Abai concluded, we wish that in their ripe old age, Mr. Shah and Mahatma Gandhi will make combined effort to educate men to learn how to go back home, back to Godhead. After 2 issues of Back to Godhead, Abai had to stop. Printing was costly, but he kept writing regularly, working at Gitopanishad, turning out new articles and philosophical purports on the scriptures, even in the same book in which he wrote his pharmaceutical formulas. So he's got this book and he's doing his pharma, and then he gets a brainstorm, and in the same book he just goes on to another page and he's writing. He doesn't want to lose it, capture his inspiration, his realization. One night, Abai had an unusual dream. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta appeared before him, beckoning. He was asking Abai to leave home, take sannyas. Abai awoke in an intensely emotional state. How horrible, he thought. He knew it was not an ordinary dream, yet the request seemed so difficult and unlikely. Take sannyas? At least it was not something he could do immediately. Now he had to improve the business, and with the profits he would print books. He went on with his duties, but remained shaken by the dreams. In 1945, the war was over, and India still in turmoil under British rule. Abai saw a good opportunity to make his business more successful. In Lucknow, 600 miles from Calcutta, he rented a building and opened his own factory, Abai Charan Dey and Sons. It was a major investment, requiring 40,000 rupees to start, and he began on a larger scale than ever before. Also, according to law, to ensure that he was not dealing in the black market or misusing chemicals, he had to employ 3 government inspectors. Yet, despite a high overhead, he established a good market, and his products were in demand. He closed his small operation in Calcutta and concentrated on the Lucknow business. Although the building was known locally to be haunted by ghosts, Abai was not deterred. But when he began his operation, some of his workers came to him frightened. Babu, Babu, there's a ghost. Abai went through the entire building chanting Hare Krishna, and after that, there were no more complaints of ghosts. On November 13, Abai wrote to his servant Gauranga, mentioning some of his difficulties in Lucknow, and asking him to come there to help. In his letter, Abai spoke bitterly of his wife, Radharani, and children. He was not happy. She was never on board for any of his devotional service. So Prabhupada writes, Gauranga Prabhu, this is a household servant, please accept my obeisances. I received your letter dated 7th. Due to lack of time, I could not reply in time. I stay here alone with some servants. If I leave now, then I have to close everything down. Due to my leaving once and closing this business, I lost 10,000 rupees, and the goodwill has also been affected. My enemies have increased. That is why I'm fighting, practically staking my whole life. I'm staying here all alone in the middle of so many difficulties, not for nothing. That's why I was writing to you repeatedly to come here. As soon as you receive this letter, show it to Dubra. Take at least 10 rupees from him and come here. Dubra may have been someone managing Prabhupada's money in Calcutta. When you come here, I will make arrangements to send money to your home. What's the point in holding you back with an excuse that there is no servant or maidservant? I tried to serve them enough by keeping servants, maidservants, and cooks, but up until today, they have not become attached to devotional service. So I am no more interested in those affairs. So this Gauranga is serving Radharani and the rest of the family members, whoever else was living there in that house. But he sees no use in doing that because they're not inclined toward devotional service. So he's asking Gauranga to come there and help him. When you come here, then I will go to Calcutta. If I see that they are interested about devotional service, then only will I maintain my establishment there. Otherwise, I will not maintain them anymore. Bring a quilt for me. Yours, Abai. So that dream takes sannyas. The two interests, family and preaching, were conflicting. Radharani had never shown any interest in Bhakti Godhead. She seemed to work against his enthusiasm, both for publishing and for earning. The business was called Abhay Charan Day and Sons, and yet the sons were disinclined to help. And when he had called for his servant to join him in Lucknow, the family objected, saying they needed Gauranga. They needed him more there. What was the use? The family was interested neither in backing him in his business, nor in taking up the life of devotional service. And since his business was primarily an outcome of his family life, he resented that he had to give so much of his energy to it. It was the old economic law by Marshall that he had learned in college. Without family affection, a man's economic impetus is weakened. Of course, there could be a compatible balance between family service and devotional service. Bhaktivedanta Thakur had described two similar obligations, bodily and spiritual. Bhaktivedanta Thakur had 2 wives and 13 children, and they were all devotees, pure devotees. Social status, mental development, cleanliness, nourishment, and the struggle for existence were all bodily obligations. Social status, mental development, cleanliness, nourishment, struggle for existence were bodily obligations. The activities of devotional service to Krishna were spiritual. And the two should parallel one another. In Bhaktivedanta Thakur's life, his family was a source of spiritual encouragement, and he used his social position to advance his preaching. But Abhai's experience had been different. The two paths seemed to be at war, each threatening the other's existence. He felt himself operating somewhat like the materialists he had criticized in his writings, absorbed in the struggle for existence with insufficient time for self-realization. Although his family made more and more demands of him, he was feeling less inclined to work for them and more inclined to preach Krishna consciousness. It was a predicament. He could only push on diligently, support his family, expand his business, and hope for a great success so that he could revive his publishing. But the Lucknow factory seemed almost beyond his means. He had purposely begun on a large scale with the aim of making a larger profit. He's going to go bankrupt. When you start out big, it doesn't work. But monthly expenses were high. He had fallen behind in the rent, and now he was involved in a court case with the landlord. Although he was visiting Calcutta regularly and shipping raw materials from Calcutta to Lucknow daily, he always found his family members in Calcutta uncooperative. His servant, Gauranga, was also reluctant to work, as Abhay required, and was thinking of going back to live with his family. Abhay again wrote to Gauranga on the 23rd. Offering my humble obeisances at the feet of the Vaishnava Gauranga Prabhu, I have received your postcard dated November 18, 1945, and got all the information. There is no need to come here just for a month after spending the money and then go back. For the present, take 25 rupees from Dubra and go home. Write a letter to me after your arrival. Then I will send the rest of your money in one of our 2 installments by money order. Then from there, you let me know when you can come here. I have started my work here in a fairly big scale. You have seen that with your own eyes. So if there is no income, who will spend for a court interrogation? Everything's on my head. The brother and sons are just eating and sleeping like a bunch of females and breaking the axe on my head. You go home as soon as you get the money and try to come back as soon as possible. My brother and sons like a bunch of women. And I'm supporting everything. They're sucking me dry. I'm working like an ass, They're taking everything and they don't want to help, and they don't even like me. They just want to eat and sleep. You go home as soon as you get the money and try to come back here as soon as possible. Yours, Shri Abhay Charan Day. This is really great. Yeah, wow. That's so great, isn't it? Jai Srila Prabhupada. Krishna. What time is it? Maybe I should stop. Yeah, I gotta stop. Darn. All right. Next time, next chapter is an unknown friend. Ooh. An unknown friend. Oh, I know what that refers to. It was a letter that Prabhupada wrote to Gandhi, and he signed it, your unknown friend. All right, so, yeah, it's a long chapter. Oh, wow. Yeah, this is great. Thank you. Thank you, Satsvarupa Maharaj. Thank you so much for your service. You've done so nicely in this biography. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Krishna. Chaitanya.